Texas Public Policy Foundation, which is an organization that does what, Congressman?
Well, the Texas Public Policy Foundation is the largest state-based think tank foundation, if you will. And a couple of years ago, the foundation decided to bring the idea of states having more control over their political destiny to Washington, D.C., and bring some of that common sense, state-oriented policy to Washington, D.C. And so they stood up an organization called States Trust. I'm Vice President for Federal Affairs at States Trust. And we are dealing with a wide variety of issues, including healthcare policy, election integrity policy, and immigration, energy, and the environment and the like. But at the moment, front and center for us is the border, especially the border between Texas and Mexico.
And you were recently down there on the border. What is the common sense solution to this surge that we've been seeing, over 180,000 interactions between the border agents and migrants just last month?
Exactly. Well, the common sense approach is to simply return to the policy that was in place actually before January 20th of this year. On January 20th of this year, the Biden administration's Department of Homeland Security, on the first half day of this new administration, terminated enrollments in a program called the Migrant Protection Protocols, otherwise known as Remain in Mexico policy. And what that policy said was that if you come into the United States, set foot on U.S. soil, and make a claim for asylum, and you are not a Mexican national, then you will be returned to Mexico while your asylum claim here is being processed. And so what that did was that took a spike in May of 2019 of over 140,000 apprehensions at the border to a little over 23,000 less than a year later. And so that Migrant Protection Protocols Remain in Mexico policy has been the most successful at reducing the surge, the crisis at the border. And that was in place under the Trump administration. The Trump administration put that in place. And what we see today is the results of effectively terminating that policy, because if you're not going to enroll new people in the program, then the program is essentially non-existent. So, and we heard from folks from Del Rio, MPP, Migrant Protection Protocols, Remain in Mexico, has been the most successful program they've ever experienced, and they want it back.
Explain the part of the border that you went and saw.
Well, in Del Rio, Texas, the Del Rio sector of the border in Valverde County has historically been one of the lowest areas with regard to experiencing illegal encounters, illegal alien encounters at that border. But year over year, from May of 2020 to May of 2021, there has been over a 400% increase. And the important thing to understand about Del Rio is a relatively small city. It's not the size of McAllen, where the RGV sector headquarters are, or El Paso, where the El Paso sector headquarters are. It has historically, and it's in basically the center of the southern border between Texas and Mexico, and so it has not seen this unprecedented crush of illegal migration across the border. In fact, only in 2019 did Del Rio have their first NGO, non-governmental organization, to deal with this crisis that started back in that spike in 2019. So this is something they're unfamiliar with and understandably unprepared for, and it is crushing the county and the area.
A lot of discussion, a lot of questions this week about Vice President Kamala Harris and her efforts on migration, whether she should go to the border or when that will happen. If you were advising her, where would you tell her she needs to go?
Well, I would definitely tell her that she needs to go to Del Rio because it was eye-opening. We had a town hall meeting that was hosted by some local officials there, and we were able to hear firsthand from people that are living in the area and how it is affecting them, their businesses, their personal lives, their families, their ranches, their properties, and to that point, one of the things I didn't do that I now regret is I wish I could have taken a poll. I've been out of office several years now, so I'm a little rusty on these things. But DHS Secretary Mayorkas has said on multiple occasions that the border is closed, almost a direct quote. I wish I could have asked the town hall meeting folks if they believed the border was closed. I think I know what the nearly unanimous, if not unanimous, opinion of that would have been.
The vice president traveling to Guatemala, to Mexico this week, addressing the root causes of migration. This was the vice president speaking at a news conference on Monday about a message to migrants. This is what she had to say.
And I want to emphasize that the goal of our work is to help Guatemalans find hope at home. At the same time, I want to be clear to folks in this region who are thinking about making that dangerous trek to the United States-Mexico border. Do not come. Do not come. The United States will continue to enforce our laws and secure our border. There are legal methods by which migration can and should occur. But we, as one of our priorities, will discourage illegal migration. And I believe if you come to our border, you will be turned back. So let's discourage our friends, our neighbors, our family members from embarking on what is otherwise an extremely dangerous journey, where in large part the only people who benefit are coyotes.
The vice president in Guatemala on Monday, did she send the right message, Congressman Hostettler?
Well, she sent the right message in words, but I can tell her from firsthand experience, from what I've heard from the local officials and the people in Del Rio especially, and that is that if she believes, as she said, that they will be turned back, that is not a very strong belief, because it's not happening. And I can tell you firsthand that it's not happening, because we saw people who had come to the border the very day that were going to be released into the interior. And this idea of telling the people of the Northern Triangle countries and elsewhere in the world not to come is something that President Biden did in an interview with George Stephanopoulos in the middle of March, and honestly on the first day of the president's administration, when the Department of Homeland Security issued that notice to terminate enrollments in the Remain in Mexico policy, they had on the same announcement an admonition for people not to come to the southwest border to try to cross illegally, because the immigration bill that the president was going to send to Capitol Hill would not cover them, since they will not have done so before January 1st of this year. So from the very beginning, literally from the very beginning of this administration, the first half day, they've known that this is going to be the result of these policies that they put in place. And they should realize that actions speak much more louder than words. So it doesn't matter how many times you admonish foreign nationals not to come, they will come, they are coming, and there's nothing that says they're going to stop coming.
John Hostettler served in Congress 6 terms in the late 90s and early 2000s, now with the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and here with us on the Washington Journal until about 8:45 Eastern, taking your phone calls as we talk about border security and immigration issues. It's 202-748-8001 for Republicans to call in, 202-748-8000 for Democrats. Independents, 202-748-8002. Plenty of calls already for you, Congressman. This is Fortune out of Springfield Gardens, New York, an independent. Good morning. Fortune, you with us?
Yes, good morning. I'm actually appalled by the congressman's comment. If he was in Congress for over 6 years, why didn't he do something when the Republicans had the majority in Congress to actually fix the problem, quote unquote, the border?
Well, we took several measures in the 12 years that I was in Congress. In 1996, we passed the Illegal Immigration Reform Act to put in place many provisions that would strengthen at that time what was the INS, and in 2006, and then the Department of Homeland Security was created, where we consolidated the Immigration and Customs under the Department of Homeland Security. And then in 2006, we enacted the Secure Fence Act, which would have established fence along, I think it was about 750 miles of the southern border. So we did take measures in that time frame, in that 12 years I was in Congress. But to your point, it has been a problem for decades. Previous administrations on the Republican side and the Democrat side have been slow to aggressively enforce the border, and it's something that we're still dealing with today.
Greg, New Carlisle, Ohio, Republican. Good morning.
Good morning, how are you?
Doing well. You're on with John Hostettler.
Yes, sir. I believe it's time to talk about impeachment of the Biden administration, because two migrants went to my best friend's home down in Texas, and they killed the family. Now, you don't hear nothing about that. They're covering it up, and I'm tired of Biden and his band of renowns. So,
Congressman Hostettler.
Well, impeachment would be a measure to potentially address this, but unfortunately, what we need to do is we need to put in place policy now that will provide for strengthening the border now. Quite honestly, if you look at the makeup of Congress at this time, it would be highly unlikely that even articles of impeachment would be considered in the Democrat-controlled House, much less tried in the Democrat-controlled Senate. And so what we're concentrating on, the Texas Public Policy Foundation, is more reinstating policy that we know has worked and putting in place new policy that we believe will even enhance even further the situation on the border.
Arlington, Washington, Jeff, Democrat. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. I think it really needs to be pointed out that nobody in the Biden administration has talked about, we have open borders. And the only people saying that are these idiots on Fox News and their minions and Trumpeteers who are saying we have open borders. How much of that stuff has caused people, immigrants, to want the surge in the so-called illegal immigration? And that's not my only question, too.
Why don't you get your second question in, Jeff, and we'll take them both.
I'm sorry, come again?
What's your second question? We'll take them both when you're done.
Okay, well, that's the other thing. I've never heard anybody talk about this. My comment about how much of the influx of people coming across the border has been caused by these idiots on Fox
All right,
News.
we'll take the question.
Well, once again, to my point earlier, actions speak much more louder than words, and so speak louder than words. And so whether it's the Biden administration saying the borders are closed, or Fox News, as you say, might be saying that the borders are open, or whoever says what, the simple fact of the matter is that the processes and the policy that is in place will determine the surge at the border. Good policy will frustrate and will cause people to stay home, stay out of the United States. Bad policy or no policy, in the case of the Biden administration, will simply invite more people into the country.
A couple questions from social media. Jan Ness wants to know specifically whether you're advocating impeaching Biden over the border policy.
No, I'm not advocating impeaching the president over border policy.
And then Mark from Florida, how could 4 years of Republicans not have fixed this problem?
Well, actually, 4 years of a Republican did fix this problem. His name was President Donald Trump, quite honestly. The Trump administration put in place policies, whether they were the Remain in Mexico policy for asylum claims, dealing with Mexico, or the asylum cooperative agreements that were signed by El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala with the United States. The Trump administration put in place many policies, some of them ultimately overturned, but many of the very strong ones were in place and did significantly reduce the illegal encounters at the border. And so 4 years of a Republican did make a significant difference.
The 180,000 encounters that were reported by the Customs and Border Patrol last month, the numbers included less unaccompanied children, but more single adults. The vast majority of those were expelled under Title 42, which allows for expulsions to prevent the spread of COVID. How long is Title 42 around for? Do we know if that's something that can be rescinded at any point, especially as the United States starts to move out of the COVID crisis? How long do you expect that to be around?
Well, I expect Title 42 to probably not be around any longer as the rest of the world continues to be vaccinated. Then I think this administration will have the excuse to relax it. They already have with regard to unaccompanied alien children, UACs as they're referred to. And so I think they're quite desirous to terminate Title 42 altogether. And I will say this, that while that will cause a significant increase in illegal re-entry into the United States, into the interior, there is the other side of this, which the folks in Del Rio talked to us about too, and that is that because of Title 42, because of those type of restrictions, individuals from Mexico who are legally allowed and have legal official documentation to come into the United States are being prohibited from doing so. And so some of them are actually finding it easier to come into the United States illegally. And so there's all kinds of problems with the seen and unseen that are happening with this Biden administration lack of policy.
It's the Texas Public Policy Foundation. I wonder if you can talk about and explain a little bit of the Texas news. This from the Dallas Morning News today. Texas Governor Greg Abbott says Texas will begin building a barrier along the state's border with Mexico, offering few details about the effort, but said Texas will start arresting those who try to breach the barrier. That's construction starting immediately, according to the article.
Well, continuing the building of the wall in Texas has been something that the Texas Public Policy Foundation, our CEO, has been putting in place has been talking about for quite a long time. And so this is something we think needs to take place. And so we have admonished the governor to do this. Unfortunately, it's likely going to have to happen with state dollars because, as you probably know, the federal government has completely stopped the construction, which has left literal holes in the fencing where individuals we saw in the Del Rio sector, for example, have been able to get under temporary fencing and get over temporary fencing as the result of holes in the wall, holes in the fencing, I guess I should say. And so Texas is doing what Texas does, and that is they'll fix their own problems. And we think that's a good place to go. The governor also said that he's going to look into individuals. He's going to take essentially applications from individuals who have had property damage and try to obtain reimbursement from the federal government as a result of the Biden administration not faithfully executing the laws of the United States, creating a task force of officials in Texas to address the border crisis. And so we think these are all very good measures that the governor is putting forward.
On funding, specifically from that Dallas News story, the Texas legislature passed a state budget that ramps up spending on border security to more than $1 billion over the coming 2 years. They note, though, it remains to be seen whether that funding is going to be tapped for this new initiative. Again, that story, dallasnews.com. Lupe, waiting in California, independent. Good morning. You're on with John Hostettler.
Good morning to you. Now, what I can't understand, if all this is going on, I'm 75. I'm in my apartment for 21 years, and there's only 3 residents that have been here since I've been here. Everybody else has 6 or 7 people living in a 1-bedroom or a 2-bedroom apartment. Now, if all this is going on, and this happened during the Trump administration, and they're still coming in, they'll keep coming in. But what I'm saying is, what is better than a video other than just words? If you can see it and touch it, take videos of what's going on in Texas, at the borderline of California. We've got everything on video. Here, everybody that's coming in, and like last night, they woke me up, 11:30, somebody leaned on my doorbell, and I said, who's there? Who's there? I wouldn't open it.
That's Lupe in California. Congressman Hostettler.
Well, I think we're hearing much of the frustration all along the border, and it's a very good idea to take video if this all falls on deaf ears with the Biden administration, which to this point it seems that that's the case. At least the rest of the American people will know and see with their own eyes what's happening as a result of this lack of policy on the part of the Biden administration. But to another point that the folks in Del Rio wanted us to talk about, as you mentioned, I served in the House of Representatives from the state of Indiana, and what's happening in Del Rio is a very transient situation. The one NGO that I mentioned that is there does not have the capacity or the authorization for an overnight accommodations for the people they serve. And so what's coming into Del Rio passes through Del Rio very quickly, and they're coming into the country. The volunteer that talked to us from the coalition at the NGO said they're going to Florida, they're going to Utah, they're going to Indiana. She didn't know I was probably from Indiana, but Indiana and all over the country. And so what begins on the border doesn't end on the border. It's coming to the rest of the country, and that's why we need good policy at the border.
Before we leave the last caller's comments on showing what's happening, do you know if Customs Border Patrol agents wear body cameras, and if so, if that's FOIA-able, if media organizations can get access to that?
You know, that's a great question, John. I'm not sure of that. I'm not sure of that, but that's something we need to ask, and I thank you for asking, because we'll look into that. Richard in Brentwood, Maryland, Democrat, good morning.
Good morning, gentlemen. A couple of callers referenced the lackluster performance when the Republicans had the opportunity to do something about immigration policy. I just want to expand on that just slightly, that this influx of illegal immigrants really started under the George Bush administration. If you recall, he met with Vicente Fox 5+ times, and you can believe me, they weren't talking about guacamole. And right after that, the hordes came over the border, and it was national policy to fill the corporate interest for cheap employment. And on another twofer for that was that it gave them an opportunity to supplant the largest minority groups, jobs and housing and everything else in this country by allowing them to come over to work for cheap labor in construction, food service, and the whole bit. So the only time the Republicans get involved in this, when they can weaponize that to distract or to possibly use it to get back into power. They were the genesis of our poor immigration policy, and George Bush is a great story for any young reporter that wants to dig that out and ferret that out to get the minutes of George Bush and Vicente Fox 5 meetings over the phone or even in person.
All right, got your point. That's Richard in Brentwood. Congressman.
Well, what's happening now is probably what's more pertinent to the folks that are living now, but I will respond in that in 2006, the Republican-controlled Senate did pass essentially an amnesty, and it was a Republican. So if you think that it's something now, you would have to understand that the first amnesty passed in 1986 created the waves that would ultimately come to us 20 years later in 2006, and it was a Republican-controlled House of Representatives that did not pass the amnesty in 2006. And so Republicans have been somewhat of two minds on this issue, but as I mentioned earlier, and I know the caller probably doesn't want to talk about the Trump administration, but we know that beyond question, the Remain in Mexico policy, the asylum cooperative agreements with the Northern Triangle countries, El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala, showed demonstrable results, significant reductions in encounters at the southern border. And so if we do want to fix this thing and not really talk a lot about history, which I'm all in favor of history, I love history, but if we want to solve it today, then what we need to do is return to the policies that we know have worked.
On our social media page, Steve in Florida saying, E-Verify is still not enforced. Who's obstructing?
Well, E-Verify is enforced, but unfortunately, to a great extent, it's voluntary on the part of employers. And for several years, when I was in Congress, and my colleague Lamar Smith from Texas was there, basically the author of the E-Verify system was there. We worked to try to get it mandatory, but as is the case, there are a lot of vested interests in Washington, D.C. that did not want that to happen. But
who specifically?
Well, employers and various employers, not all employers, but there are a lot of industries that did not want to take this on. And so
because of the cost, or because the concern that they would have to lose workers because of it?
They would lose workers. They would lose workers, and they would have to pay higher wages in order to obtain workers to replace them. And so we think when I was in Congress, we attempted to make that mandatory on several occasions, on multiple occasions, but we were not able to. So the caller has an excellent point about a very important program that likewise works.
Although I guess I should say industries don't get a vote in Congress. So was it Republicans that pushed back against you making that mandatory? Was it Democrats that pushed back against it? Where, in terms of when you tried to move it to the floor, where was the pushback?
Well, the pushback was across the board, and it was bicameral, it was bipartisan. When the Democrats had control of both chambers of Congress and the White House for 2 years, they could have put E-Verify as mandatory. They could do it today. They haven't done it today, and Republicans didn't make it. We created it, but we didn't make it mandatory. Like I said, there are both sides to blame for this.
Less than 15 minutes left with Congressman John Hostettler of the Texas Public Policy Foundation, works on their States Trust initiative there. You can check them out at statestrust.com. On Twitter, it's at States Trust, easy enough to find. Tony in Connecticut, Democrat, you're next.
Good morning, guys. I'm a lifelong Democrat in a blue state, and my senators and AOC a couple of years ago went down and showed those dying kids in the water. They showed the kids in the cages, etc. And I don't see them anymore. And I'm tired of seeing these poor people dying in these rivers, etc. And the other thing that concerns me is there seems to be a divide. Certain parties, certain sides will call this a crisis. Others don't call it a crisis, like CNN does not call it a crisis. And you know what? Washington Journal, C-SPAN, I watched you guys the last few weeks or so. You've had the border crisis. There's all this stuff going on. You guys have not used the word crisis yet. I heard Pedro the other day call it an issue. Is this a crisis or is it not a crisis? And please stop making this a partisan thing. Where is AOC? Where are these people? This is the silence is deafening.
So Tony, you're a lifelong Democrat. Did you vote for Joe Biden?
Yes, I did, and I'm very disappointed. My gas has gone up. My food has gone up. This is craziness.
Did you think Joe Biden has a stronger border policy than Donald Trump?
Well, you know what concerns me? We paid for the wall, and Biden stopped the border wall. I mean, he left holes in the wall. Why do you leave holes in the wall where people are coming through?
So I guess, Tony, I guess, Tony, my question is, why did you vote for Joe Biden?
I voted for Biden because I thought we needed a change. I thought we needed a change. The country was just too divided. I really didn't mind Trump's policies, but what I saw on TV, including this station, is there is just too much hatred. You hear the people on TV, there's hatred. This guy can't walk the street or draw a straight line. You see this thing on the G7 summit. These people are meeting with Jill Biden. They didn't give Melania the time of day. When they go over there, there was unnamed sources and big old controversies started. All this stuff, you couldn't get anything done.
That's Tony in Connecticut. Congressman.
Well, there is an issue at the border, and in my opinion, as a result of visiting Del Rio recently and hearing all of the other stories from the border, as well as what's potentially happening within the interior, I believe there's a crisis, and I think it's important for folks like Tony to know that everything that's going on now under the Biden administration, the candidate Joe Biden said in a very lengthy campaign website dissertation on what was going to happen. All of this we knew, and the Texas Public Policy Foundation, after the election in November of 2020, basically war-gamed Joe Biden doing what he said he was going to do during the campaign. And we predicted this crisis at the border. And so this is not really news. It's newsworthy as it is today, but what's happening is not really news as such. I will address also a very troubling aspect of our visit to the border, and that was the sheriff mentioned that in 2020, they unfortunately pulled either 3 or 4 individuals from the water who had drowned as a result of trying to cross illegally. This year, they've already taken 9 individuals out of various bodies of water that have tried to cross, including a Haitian woman who was expecting twins. And the sheriff said that they claim all 3 souls in their statistics, which I think is very appropriate. So this lack of a policy, these pull factors that are drawing hundreds of thousands and will likely be millions by the end of the calendar year to the border are causing widespread catastrophe upon humanity in all various aspects of this endeavor. And I hope that the Biden administration will take another look at policy that's worked.
You talked about your trip to Del Rio several times. What's on the other side of the border from Del Rio?
A city, that's a great question. A city, Acuna is the name of the city. I think I've got that right. And it's a much larger city than Del Rio. It's about 5 to 6 times the size of Del Rio. And a lot of the people in Del Rio work in Acuna and can cross into Mexico to work, continue. And we had one just tragic account from one of the attendees of our town hall meeting that said she has a friend that lives in Mexico that she works with that was raped by, they believe, that she alleged was an illegal alien that was making their way through Mexico into the United States. And so this tragedy is being played out on both sides of the border by both citizenry, both the citizenry of the United States and the citizenry of Mexico. And the people in Acuna are at least as frustrated and furious about what's happening on the border as the folks in Del Rio. It's just that the reason that this is all happening is because of the lack of policy and the changes in policy by the Biden administration.
Time for just a few more calls, less than 10 minutes left with Congressman John Hostettler. Blake's been waiting in Mississippi, Leland, Mississippi.